Subpoenaed. Without even realizing what I was doing, I stepped off the small ladder I'd pulled out of the closet and waddled back to the bed. When it came to me, I sat down heavily, staring at what was visible through the open, dangling lid of the smoke detector. All the implications of why and how the object of my gaze had ended up where it was, and what exactly that meant, flooded my mind. I'm not exactly sure when the suspicion that Veronica, my wife of 3 years now, was cheating on me solidified in my mind, but it did. From my research, she was showing many of the classic signs of adultery. The sudden change from never leaving on overnight trips for work to leaving for an entire weekend, like right now, has only reinforced what had been making me nervous for a while. I mean, who leaves for work on a Friday afternoon? At least the last short 2-day trip she took was less socially disruptive in the middle of the week. In retrospect, suspicions started rearing their ugly heads about a month ago. I returned from my trip and found that Ronnie had suddenly changed. Colder, more emotionally detached than before, less affectionate by and large. We always had sex after I returned from my trip, but this time she apologized and refused. I tried a couple more nights after that, but was rebuffed. Attentive guy that I was, I stopped nagging, hoping she would come out of the horror she was in. I realized that here we were a month later, and we hadn't made love since the night before the first trip. Looking at the smoke detector above the bed in the bedroom of our apartment, I now knew why. The sudden change in one behavior prompted me to look for other differences. When I opened my eyes, there was no shortage of clues. I noticed that she looked at me when she thought I was busy doing something else, and then looked away when I looked at her. Was it just me, or did her "I love you" sound a bit strained these days? Besides, a lot of things have changed in her life lately. From the spike in bachelorette parties, suddenly changing her computer password, taking phone calls and then walking out of earshot while talking, to conversations with her best friend Julie in the kitchen that would abruptly stop when I walked into the house. They were all there, all reinforcing my growing paranoia. Not wanting to accept what I now strongly suspected, I began cataloging when I thought she had the opportunity. I followed her to the next bachelorette party and was pleasantly surprised to find her exactly where she was supposed to be and behaving exactly as a wife should. In a fit of petty anger, I changed my login password too. If she's going to keep secrets, I'll be damned if I'm going to give her free access to my stuff. Her actions and attitude affected me. Sometimes I couldn't guarantee I'd be calm enough to pretend to be normal at home, so I'd stay later at the office or go out for a drink with friends. I hated the things she drove me to. For example, I started calling her at work at lunchtime. I hated it even more as I saw the pattern forming over the course of a few weeks. Whereas before she always only took half for lunch, she now took an hour or more almost every day. Just enough time to have lunch with her lover. Just enough time for quick sex. Unfortunately, part of my job was to keep an eye on the reception desk and the phones on my lunch hour, so I could never keep an eye on Ronnie's work to keep track of her. I suppose I could have taken the day off, but subconsciously I was afraid of what I would discover. I was disappointed that our finances didn't stretch to hiring a private investigator to accompany her on her first overnight work trip 2 weeks ago. I called her any time, and she always answered quickly and never out of breath, but I knew she was a smart woman. How smart was discovered by the object hidden by the smoke detector cover over the bed. One look at that object, and I knew immediately that she was not only deceiving me, but doing everything she could to keep me from finding out. That day, all my suspicions came together. Wanting to see my wife before she left for the weekend to see her lover, perhaps in the vain hope of reminding her that I loved her, I returned home a little early, timing it so that she would be home from the office but not yet at the airport. She clearly wasn't expecting me and walked out of the bedroom looking guilty as hell. I sat on the bed until she had no choice but to go into the bathroom to finish her makeup. I then carefully checked the closet and under the bed. Nothing. Then checked that her phone was still protected by an unknown password, and carefully pulled enough clothes out of her suitcase to make sure there were no suspicious underwear or cocktail dresses. This puzzled me. When I entered the house, she was definitely up to no good in this room. After that, I checked the trunk of her car for any other bags. Nothing. But she's a very smart woman. instead of allaying my fears and easing my suspicions that my loving wife was doing something dirty to me. The lack of evidence only reinforced them. It pissed me off that she was outsmarting me. I came up with a plan to catch her that was within my budget. Next week, I'd make up my own work trip. Maybe Veronica would take the opportunity to invite her lover over while I was gone. I'd set up a tiny camera in the smoke detector above the bed to record the action. It was only a studio apartment, so one camera was enough for me. Once my suspicions were confirmed, I knew exactly what to do to dissolve this joke marriage without being financially abused. Thus, 3 hours after Veronica left for her second overnight business trip, I pushed the bed aside, pulled our little 3-step home ladder under the centrally located smoke alarm, and released the small clip on the side of the device, causing the lid to open and hang on a hinge. Inside was the exact same camera as the one I held in my left hand. A camera that transmitted a signal to a small transponder that could be hidden anywhere. A transponder that in turn transmitted the signal to either a laptop for direct viewing or a computer for later viewing. I knew with certainty that my wife would prefer a combination of both. So not only was she having an affair, but she was monitoring my whereabouts and behavior while she did so to see signs that I was suspicious of her. I stood up and made my way to the living room. There was another smoke detector there and, of course, another camera. Just to confirm my suspicions without a shadow of a doubt, I went over my car with a fine-toothed comb. It took me a quarter of an hour to find the tiny GPS tracker. I rested my hands on the hood, chin on my chest, and was sickened by the thought that at this very moment, my wife was in another city being fucked by an unknown stranger. Or was she not? Suddenly, I remembered how abruptly Veronica had refused my offers to drop her off at the airport. I lifted my head, staring unseeingly at the garage door while my thoughts raced. Had she really not flown anywhere? Could she be somewhere in the city right now? No, the woman I knew was too smart not to get the guy to put a rubber on. Too much chance of passing sexually transmitted diseases to me. I shook my head, realizing I was distracting myself by putting off the inevitable conversation with myself. Could I forgive my wife sleeping with someone other than me? Never. Okay. This conversation is over. The thought of waiting for her to return Sunday night to meet her face-to-face was not an option. I needed to find her and get this over with immediately. Veronica handled all the family finances. I pulled all the latest bank statements out of the closet and looked at them for the last month. Nothing out of the ordinary until I got to the line transferred to account number XYZ, an amount of $500. Logging into NetBank, I plugged in said account number. I looked in the notebook where my wife kept coded passwords, found an unfamiliar one, then guessed the code on the third try. It was a credit card I didn't know existed. The last transaction wasn't even 3 hours old, at a cheap chain motel 10 minutes away. For some reason, the realization that she was footing the bill for her date with her lover made me angry. The realization that she was actually stealing our money to do this made me furious. Next was a recording from the same motel that coincided with her first supposed trip out of town. Even higher up, a recording made when she bought the surveillance equipment. Ironically, she bought it at the same store I did. A quick glance at the statement showed that she made the purchase 3 days after I returned from my last trip, so she'd probably met the asshole while I was gone. It made sense. More likely was that she was recording the camera footage. Back at my car, I recorded the GPS tracker's data and Googled it. Sure enough, it had a software feature that could signal to a cell phone when the device was in motion. So no need to alarm her lover's conscience and her conscience by having a feed from our house on the screen at all times. All she had to do was heed the alarm. Sneaky bitch. Then my thoughts returned to what I did or didn't do to keep her faithful to me. All the usual reasons flashed through my mind that I suppose all people in my position thought. Was I unsatisfactory in bed? I didn't think so. Until she interrupted me, I thought she was thoroughly enjoying my efforts. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I really was shit in bed and she was faking it all along. God, was I really doubting my manhood? All these thoughts made me angrier rather than calmer, so I turned my mind to my options. What was she doing right now? What if I'm wrong? What would she do if she'd already seen me find her cell? Kick her boyfriend out of their love nest? Accelerate their plans to dump me, rip me off, and make her ride off into the sunset with him? Or was she just sitting there, with or without him, thinking of a compelling reason why she should keep me under surveillance? Assuming she's watching the cameras, does she have reason to suspect I know where she is? Looking around, I assessed the interior view camera. I think she saw me sitting on the couch, but I doubt she saw me rummaging through the file cabinet and working at the desk in the corner. She would have noticed the frantic activity, but had no idea what it was all about, for the rather vindictive reason of cutting into their or her planning time, and no other. I decided to confront her now. Anger or no anger on my part, I don't know. Relying on the fact that there was no camera in the kitchen, I went in there and left the house through the kitchen door. Opening the side door of the garage, I removed the tracker and placed it on the shelf next to the car, figuring it wasn't sensitive enough to detect such a small movement. Pulling up to a cheap motel on the way out of town, I parked a little farther away. Stepping in the dark, I found her car hidden behind the main building, invisible from the highway. There were only 4 cars in the parking lot, and none within 5 spaces of her. The room directly in front of her car was also the only one with a light still on. Looking around for witnesses before creeping to the window, I checked to see if there was a view into the room. There wasn't. Steeling my ego for what I might discover, I raised my hand, clenched my fist, and prepared to knock. Before my knuckles could make contact with the wood, I saw the headlights of a car pulling out from around the corner. Thinking it might be her lover, I stepped away from the door, pretending to look for my room. A small car with the name of a local pizzeria stopped next to my wife's car. I lazily thought she was having a late dinner, but then I remembered that on a Friday night in this town, you can wait up to 3 hours for pizza delivery. The teenager got out of the car, retrieved a pizza box and a bottle of soft drink from the back seat, and knocked on the door. Veronica opened it, dressed exactly as she had been when she left our house, held out some cash, and then accepted the goods. From the shadows, I watched the delivery man walk back to his car. My wife left the door open while she carried a pizza in one hand and a drink in the other to place them next to the bed. Releasing her hands, she turned to the door to close it. She ahead when she saw me in the doorway. Then her gaze flicked back to the bed. Slightly embarrassed by the obviousness of the tears on her face, I looked around the rest of the room. The bed was crumpled, but only as if there was a person lying on top of the blanket. Her laptop was open on the bedside table, the screen split, one side showing our living room, the other our bedroom. Without saying a word, I made my way into the room. Entering the bathroom, I checked that it was empty. Only her toiletries were on the sink. Back in the main room, I looked in the closet, empty, then knelt down to look under the bed. Nothing. That exhausted all the hiding places in the tiny motel room. I plopped down on the hard office chair that stood under the tiny desk. So I was right then. She'd seen me open her cameras, told her lover to leave, and cried when she realized her date had fallen through. That was good news, wasn't it? Of course, it meant she was remorseful for what she had done to me, to us. Then you started calling me 3 or 4 times during my lunch break to make sure I was there and not spying on you so you could meet your mistress in peace. My work phone records all missed calls. I started taking longer lunch breaks and seeing if your car was parked at work. Julie was giving me advice the whole time. You almost caught us talking in the kitchen once, remember? By the way, she thinks I'm just being paranoid. I'm eating something I don't know for sure. Tonight, when you came home early and almost caught me changing the battery in my bedroom camera, I thought I was going to faint from the stress. I was sure you were cheating on me, but I needed proof. I bought cameras and a GPS tracker to get that proof and end my dilemma. I still don't know for sure. I know you were just sitting home alone when I went on that first trip, but I thought it was just because it was during the week. I was planning on going away for the weekend so you could have more time. Please, are you having an affair or not? Can you just tell me? The uncertainty is killing me. I looked at her suffering, haggard face. My mind was in absolute turmoil as I watched her agony. My idea of myself as an honest person had completely misled me into thinking that there was only one solution to the clues I had been given. The thought that the same clues accounted for the fact that my wife thought I was cheating on her could not even enter my head with even an edge of consciousness. The pain reflected on her face, more than words, convinced me that she was telling the truth. I was so devastated thinking she was deceiving me that I missed all signs that she thought I was doing the dirty on her. My mind was suddenly filled with sympathy for her. I remembered the terror and insecurity I felt when I imagined her in another man's arms. She was experiencing the exact same torture, enough to lie and create a situation where I could meet my lover so she could finish. I realized that the looks I had interpreted as guilt were actually a silent assessment of my trustworthiness, her detachment, the pain of what she perceived as my betrayal. No wonder there hadn't been a single sincere verbal affirmation of her love in the last month. How could she speak words of love to a man she suspected of stabbing her in the back? It was clear to me that I had only glimpsed a glimpse of the pain she had been in for a month. Suddenly, a horrible thought crossed my mind. Do you think Dave and Allison felt the same way? What? What do Dave and Allison have to do with this? Do you think your ex-husband and my ex-wife felt pain, fear, and doubt like we did when she caught us in bed and told him? No wonder neither of them ever thought about forgiving us. They were too devastated. I realized from the renewed look of horror on Veronica's face that the full impact of hurting our former spouses, the people we supposedly loved, was bearing down on her. Her knees buckled, and she fell back onto the bed. Epilogue. 2 weeks later, we began negotiations on how to separate with a minimum of fuss. It was clear from the ease with which she believed I was capable of betraying her and vice versa that we both had serious trust issues. She was a cheater, as I was, in a relationship born of deception. No amount of sugarcoating could hide the fact that our relationship was doomed from the start. Most people judge others by their own standards, so each of us suspected worse, knew the other was capable of deception. We parted as friends and even satisfied each other's sexual desires from time to time. When her biological window was almost closed, Veronica actually approached me a couple years later, asking that since she couldn't find a new life partner, would I agree to be the father of her child, without any legal conditions. I thought that was too weird and declined. From then on, I didn't trust her enough to have sex with her without a condom. After a couple more years, we split up. The last time I heard from her, she was still single, just like me. I'm glad we enjoyed sex when we were together while still married to other people, because now we're definitely paying for it.